I couldn't believe some of the things they wrote about the prequels, you know? I mean, but really, beyond, I didn't like it. You ruined my childhood, and I'm still angry about the way they treated Jake Lloyd. He was only 10 years old, that boy, and he did exactly what George wanted him to do. Believe me, I understand clunky dialogue. So I almost got hornswoggled in that documentary where they weren't calling it The People versus George Lucas at the time, but I could tell from the questions they were asking me, it was an open invitation to trash George.
George Lucas raped our childhood. 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 George Lucas raped our childhood.
And I have issues with George, but I love that man.
You go to make a movie and all you do is get criticized, and people try to make decisions about what you're going to do before you do it. You know, it's not much fun, and you can't experiment. You can't do anything. You have to do it a certain way. I don't like that. I never did. I started out in experimental films, and I want to go back to experimental films. But of course, nobody wants to see experimental films.
The main thing is to protect these characters. Make sure that they still continue to live in the way that you created them.
I'm curious that the Force doesn't get muddled into a bunch of garbly-gook.
Can I just say, though, a lot of times I would say to Ryan, we got to think about the fans. And he said, no, we got to think about the story, and we got to think about our movie. Which
Hello everyone, and welcome to Revenge of the Prequels Episode 1. Before we get started, I feel a lengthy introduction is warranted, as there are some things you need to know about both myself and why I'm doing this. I do by no means think the Star Wars prequels are perfect movies. There are many objective criticisms of these movies, which I acknowledge and have influenced my subjective opinion of them, but only to a very mild extent. But all in all, I love these movies, and before someone says in the comments, "Oh, you're just a prequel fanboy," or something regurgitated from the pretentious cesspool of red letter media, yes, I am a prequel fanboy, and fucking proud of it. I appreciate the prequels in ways most people do not or simply don't care to. I don't feel shame for admitting that the prequels are lovable movies filled with awesome moments and a compelling story, unlike a lot of other YouTubers who made their careers by following in Plinkett's footsteps, who still think it's cool to shit on these movies. I also love the shit out of George Lucas, and think it's a damn shame that he stepped away from the franchise. I do not fault anyone for disliking the prequels, but these malicious original trilogy fanboy scum were celebrating the departure of Lucas, and still, year after year, continue to drive nails into the long-dead corpses of the prequels, digging up new nitpicks and emphasizing them to death so they can scrape together a new video hoping for one last big score of views, or just for shits and gigs trying to sound cool. And amongst this highly appraised critic community on YouTube, the circulating trend was these movies were the worst things to ever happen to cinema. George Lucas was a horrible human being who ruined childhoods. George Lucas was a creative hack who just wanted to shill toys in his movies. Jar Jar Binks was the worst character of all time. These movies were abominations. That was the main consensus. For someone like myself who grew up watching these movies and didn't realize that this was the popular opinion of the prequels, well, let's just say it was a rude awakening. I understood some of the criticisms, but I had no idea where this ridiculous and honestly pathetic hatred for these movies stemmed from. This ultimately led to George Lucas stepping down and a whole bunch of shit people celebrating. Not celebrating that we were going to have more Star Wars movies. No, I'm not talking about those people. These people were the ones celebrating that we were finally getting Star Wars without George Lucas. These are the same people who cannot stop bitching about how poorly the prequels have aged. So I guess it's sweet poetic justice that the prequels weren't the only things to age poorly, because all of these smug online douchebags have had to eat their shitty words right back up, as Star Wars in the hands of Disney has seen a monumental decline. A decline that will echo through the history of the film industry and pop culture forever. They can deny it all they want. And funnily enough, many of these people I'm going to mention in this video series have gone to ridiculous lengths to defend Disney Star Wars and paint them in a more positive light, while still relentlessly doing the opposite to the prequel movie, despite the Disney Star Wars films being borderline indefensible and universally despised by the Star Wars fandom, in a matter of days after the worldwide release of The Last Jedi. Not years, days. Many of these individuals took to the internet and proceeded to praise The Last Jedi to death, thinking their audiences would buy their word gladly. I, in fact, was one of those sheep who took these same critics as gospel when it came to films including The Last Jedi, since these online personalities had been so objectively critical of the prequels in the past. And poetically enough, many of these reviews and the credibility of these reviewers and online personalities have had their credibilities crushed since The Last Jedi released. Years of credibility crushed overnight. Since The Last Jedi came out, comments such as, "The prequel movies are the most disappointing movies in film history," "George Lucas is an awful writer," or like the utterly retarded butthurt song you heard in my intro, "George Lucas raped my childhood." All of these stupid classic complaints about the prequel movies are now laughed at hysterically, and really goes to show how childish and pathetic these people were. Because the first thing Disney did with The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi was literally kill the most beloved parts of the original trilogy that these people claimed to cherish. And like true hypocrites, many of these same people are the ones now fanboying the new Star Wars without admitting they criticized the prequels for the exact same thing. And I think the majority of us can agree, while the prequels have flaws, they didn't break the universe, the immersion, or spit in the face of the fans the way these extremist, butthurt crybabies would have you believe. Right, so that concludes the introduction. Now let's start the response. First on the chopping block, I hate everything. Now for those of you who don't know, I already made a response to I Hate Everything's moronic Star Wars The Last Jedi review due to viewer request. You can find a link to it in the description if you'd like to check it out. We are going to be looking at another I Hate Everything video that a viewer linked me, but to start off I need to use this small piece of footage from I Hate Everything's Last Jedi video.
I think the reaction and response to The Last Jedi is quite frankly embarrassing, and there are a lot of people who should be ashamed for the things they've said because of a Star Wars movie. What kind of world are we living in where it's normal for people to send a director hate messages because they didn't like the movie they made?
I don't think you have the right to tell any Star Wars fan to be ashamed of anything after years of doing the exact same thing yourself. Anyway, let's do this. Okay, seriously, fuck your opinion. It's not a get out of jail free card for the stupid shit you say in your videos.
How could anyone hate Star Wars, one of the most popular and arguably most important pieces of science fiction that still holds up even 30 years later? However, the creator of Star Wars, on the other hand, George I Like to Ruin Everything Lucas, is widely hated for two main reasons. One, he made the abomination prequel Star Wars movies, and two, he went back and f***ed about with a perfectly fine original trilogy by adding in unnecessary, really bad looking CG scenes.
See, this video came out in 2013, back when the prequel YouTube hate trend was at an all-time high. Okay, so George I Like to Ruin Everything Lucas created Star Wars, made the original trilogy, made the 3 prequels which are beloved by millions of people. You call them abominable, almost like it's implied, like you're trying to paint a picture to the audience or warp their perspective. The prequels are abominations, that's fact, ladies and gentlemen, that's what he's trying to say. The prequels are bad, end of story, is what you would have them believe. As for the special editions, some of the changes like the cantina scene and Hayden Christensen and a few inserted creatures were jarring changes, but there were several good changes like lightsaber clarity and the Emperor that were very much warranted. But no guys, no, George Lucas had his hands on it, so it must mean everything he does by that logic is automatically bad, just by that alone. Grow up!
So let's start with the prequels, which was a time for George Lucas to take the helm directing once again, which he had not actually done since the original Star Wars film. He had full control over every little thing that happened in the prequel films, and it's probably why they turned out such abominations. No one had the balls to go up to him and just say, "What the f*** are you doing?" I fear to think what the original trilogy would have been like if he'd had the same amount of control that he had over the prequels.
First off, George Lucas had every right to make Star Wars his way. as it was his story that originated inside his own head. Does that mean every idea he had was golden? No, of course not. But why do you hate him for having entire creative control over the prequels? That would be like me hating J.K. Rowling for writing the Harry Potter prequels. I didn't think the Fantastic Beasts books or movies were necessary, nor have I seen them. But they'd have to seriously, with great authority, spit in the face of every Harry Potter fan for me to make a video entitled I Hate J.K. Rowling, and one of the reasons in that video being that I hate that she had creative control over her own story. And if that's how you see the prequels, then I think it says more about you than it does about George. Also, another gentleman had entire creative control over Star Wars. He had been handed the keys to a sequel project of Lucas's 40-year-old franchise. This man had a veteran of the OT saying, "What the fuck are you doing?" as you so lovingly wanted to say to Lucas. And this man still went ahead with his own vision and royally and indisputably fucked the Star Wars franchise going forward. So when Lucas makes some bad decisions on his own work, you hate him. But when an indie director who makes pretty movies rapes another man's work, that's okay with you. I think I've made my point.
Right, now let's quickly run through each prequel film and briefly describe why I think they're awful. Star Wars Episode 1 The Phantom Menace, one of the most hyped films ever, and it was awful. Terrible script, too much CG, completely boring, too long, awful acting, whole scenes that make the original trilogy make no sense. And don't you dare say, oh, the pod racing bit was really good though. No, it only stood out as being good because it was something actually happening in the film.
The script for The Phantom Menace wasn't fantastic, but I wouldn't exactly call it terrible. Too much CGI. First off, for the time period, the CG was fantastic. I showed in my intro how Lucas liked to experiment with filmmaking, and you can't deny that he pushed special effects to its limits. For a setting like Star Wars, CGI makes it look and feel like a galaxy far, far away. I've always given sci-fi film more leniency with the CGI since it largely takes place in locations that aren't possible to recreate with practical effects. The only parts of the OT that I can think of that weren't CG are the forest world of Endor, the desert world of Tatooine, Dagobah, and parts of Hoth. The Phantom Menace has a practical forest world, a practical desert world, and Coruscant. Why does Cloud City get a pass but not Coruscant? The point I'm getting at here is critics of the prequels make CGI out to be the devil. Funnily enough, these same people praise The Last Jedi solely because it's pretty. I hate everything being one of those people. You have to be actively looking for flaws in the prequels in order to have the CGI be as distracting as people claim it to be. As for being too long in the grand scheme of things, no, not really. The Phantom Menace sets up the entire saga, and George Lucas puts a lot of time in building his world to make it feel engrossing and lived in. The Senate meetings aren't exactly the edge of your seat thrill ride you were expecting, but they do play a role in the grand scheme of things. Jake Lloyd was 8 years old, and Lucas portrayed Anakin as a hopeful, innocent slave boy who wanted to venture out into the stars. If his campy performance bothered you that much, I really don't know what you were expecting. The C-3PO thing was a bad example. I'd assume you'd say the Midichlorians, because honestly that's the one thing that's a bit of a logic stretch from the original trilogy. To be fair, I will give you that. And fuck you, the pod racing scene was great. You're just in denial, man. Whatever happened to this part of your Last Jedi video?
This angry vocal minority of so-called fans has buried any real criticism of the film and has sent the message that it ruined Star Wars and that it's a dreadful piece of filmmaking when it really isn't. Just like how the meme for The Force Awakens is that it's identical to A New Hope and there's no more nuance or room for discussion beyond that. It's reductive, and I really hope it doesn't send the wrong message to Disney that they should take away the freedom from the directors and writers and turn it all into a focus-tested Jedi council of money-hungry fat cats who have no passion for Star Wars at all. I thought fans were supposed to see the good, not pass off nitpicks and complaints as a reason to hate a new movie in their beloved series. I thought fans were supposed to see the good, not pass off nitpicks and complaints as a reason to hate a new movie in their beloved series.
You see what I mean? People like I hate everything no matter what it is. If it's prequel, they will still find a way to bitch about it. Some way, somehow, they will find a way to bitch.
Episode 2, Attack of the Clones, sequel to one of the most awful films ever, also boasts a terrible script, too much needless CG, is completely boring, is too long, has awful acting, and completely ruins characters from the original trilogy.
Wow, Episode 2 is a terrible sequel to one of the worst films ever. The Phantom Menace is one of the worst films ever.
You make me happy.
Also again, straw man arguments. Terrible script and acting? Well, maybe one or two characters, yes. But ask yourself, as I know you're referring to Anakin, how in the actual fuck is Anakin meant to act around a girl he has been infatuated for 10 years after he's been living a celibate life of a Jedi, which are the equivalent to monks in real life? How exactly is he supposed to not be awkward? Makes a lot of sense when you think about it, doesn't it? The script could have been better, but understand this is a different universe and characters interact in different ways. If Aragorn and Arwen from the Lord of the Rings trilogy spoke romantic dialogue to each other in English, because almost all of their entire romantic dialogue was in Elvish, it might not sound so good either. But in different fictional universes, character dialogue is in a different context to our own. At least that's how I see it. Long and boring. Long, yes. Boring, maybe on the third or the fourth viewing, but only in some areas. Not what I would consider to be god-awful. But again, there's no substance behind these remarks. It's just like they're implied facts. And fuck you, once again, you're just trying to discredit universally praised parts of the prequels in order to warp people into hating them just like you. Yoda fighting was amazing. It doesn't ruin his character at all. He uses the Force at first, but when it doesn't work, he has to get his hands dirty. He picks up a lightsaber, a Jedi's signature fucking weapon, and starts fighting. How does that break character? How does that break lore? He even has a combat style that's practical for his handicap. So fuck you.
Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, terrible sequel to the awful sequel that was a sequel to one of the worst prequel movies ever made. And you guessed it, terrible script, too much CG, completely boring, too long, awful acting, and completely contradicts most of the things that happen in the original trilogy.
What? Revenge of the Sith had so much to tell. So much happens in this movie. Almost too much for one movie, which is why the ending felt rushed in the first place. The acting was for the majority really good. Mind you, some areas were a little too campy for even my liking. Filled with great moments and one of the most entertaining openings to a Star Wars movie. Certainly a better space battle than the Disney abortion you like to jerk off to. How you consider this movie to be boring is absolutely beyond my comprehension. Some scenes maybe, but you're using a few snips from minor scenes to create a diluted perspective as to what this film actually is. And I honestly have no idea whatsoever as to how you think this movie contradicts everything from the original trilogy. A little substance would be nice, because I assure you, not even the 17,000 morons who liked this video would agree with you on that in 2018.
It's almost like Lucas just didn't give a shit. Oh wait, he obviously didn't. He completely lost the skill of how to work with actors and focused way more on shoving references in like, hey look, it's Yoda flinging around with a lightsaber, isn't that cool? Hey look, it's C-3PO and R2-D2 really badly thrown into these pointless action scenes. Hey look, it's the worst line in cinematic history.
I'm sure I don't have to explain why that part of the video has aged so poorly. Yeah, George Lucas didn't care about Star Wars or the fans. That's why he called the signing over of Star Wars to Disney the equivalent of a breakup. He left Star Wars because of relentless entitled fucktards like you, and signed Star Wars over to Disney so fans like you could just shut the fuck up and be happy. People say he did it for the money. Get over yourselves. Lucas was already ridiculously rich. He made a personal decision about a product he cared about for the fans of his product. I don't have a lot of good to say about Rian Johnson, but I'm absolutely sure he cared about his moronic fan fiction because he was involved in the entire creative process. Same as George Lucas was involved with the entire creative process of the prequels. Also, that's another lazy insult to the prequels, saying that Lucas only cared about pointless references in his movies. By the way, if you're implying that the climax of Attack of the Clones was a pointless action scene, I could say the exact same thing about the Battle of Hoth. Yep, I said it. And based on I Hate Everything's logic, and lack of substance in this lazy, malicious video, I would be correct.
The charm and authenticity was just completely lost. The humor was forced, awful and badly written. Nothing worked.
Really? Nothing worked? Nothing worked? Humor is very subjective, but since you didn't want to provide any context for your idiotic half-assed remarks, I'm going to assume you're referring to Jar Jar. And to say that none of the humor worked in all three movies because of one character is total, utter bullshit.
And unlike the effects in the original trilogy, the CG just doesn't hold up now. It all looks too fake and clean.
Bullshit. The CG in the OT has moments where even I, someone who puts almost no emphasis on visuals, said, wow, that looks pretty shit. And yeah, it's meant to look clean. It's by design, you jackass.
Now I know some people actually do like the prequels amazingly, and while I don't understand it myself, what I will say is that if you took the title of Star Wars away from the prequels, they would be just some pretty mediocre space opera films with some cool action scenes here and there. But the fact that we're supposed to believe that these are in the same universe as the beloved original trilogy is what drives me crazy.
First of all, if you applied that same logic to Star Wars The Last Jedi, or any of the Disney films outside of Rogue One, I'm sure you would feel really fucking stupid. I'm absolutely amazed that while making your abominable Star Wars The Last Jedi video, yes, I know how you like to use that word, I cannot believe you lack this much self-awareness. Also, the argument that these movies are held up by the original trilogy doesn't really make sense, because this predates the original trilogy in the timeline. And if this weren't a Star Wars movie that had to keep continuity with the original trilogy, these movies wouldn't have been made the way they are to begin with. What I'm saying is this. They are what they are because they are Star Wars movies in the Star Wars universe. Perhaps I can go into more depth regarding this notion in a later video. Oh, and how dare these movies share the same universe as the beloved and utterly perfect original trilogy, even though they are completely divorced from the original trilogy and have virtually no impact on it. It's just a travesty. How dare these movies share the same beloved title of Star Wars? How dare they flush out the universe and expand the lore and provide us with awesome characters and epic spectacle set pieces? You're pathetic.
And as if that wasn't bad enough, Lucas just had to go and mess with the original films. Hey, let's take all the original films and add loads of pointless CG and then make the original versions unavailable so fans literally have no choice but to put up with all this fucking hell. These CG versions of the original films have actually spawned one of the worst shots I've ever seen in a film, and I've seen quite a lot of films. Take a look at the original scene from this film. Simple and to the point. Now look at this special edition bullshit version. He decided that putting some kind of creature right in front of the camera would add something to it. No. First off, the CG is terrible. It is completely distracting, and how are we even supposed to know what it is?
I don't own the original trilogy, but just because that scene pissed you off so much, I might just go out and buy 2 box sets of the remastered version. Yes, some of the special edition moments may have been ill-advised, but you think that's the worst. You're bitching about a 2-second scene with an additional creature on the internet, and you're using it as an argument for a malicious video called I Hate George Lucas. What the fuck is wrong with people like you?
So, Kite Man, what do you think of George Lucas? Well, I think he is a... Okay, now Aquaman. Huh? Oh, did you really need to kill him? Whatever, the deserved it.
Yeah, so much for that everyone's entitled to their own opinion bullshit you like to brush your balls against in your opening title screen. Wow, I honestly didn't think I would have so much to say about a 4-minute I Hate Everything video. I honestly didn't think I Hate Everything could cram so much retardation into 4 minutes. But if anyone could do it, it's I Hate Everything. Anyway, despite my malicious words, I hope you all understand why these videos are being made. I don't like people like I Hate Everything, not because he dislikes the prequels, as everyone has a right to their opinion. I don't like people like I Hate Everything because they are a bunch of gigantic malicious hypocrites who made their careers on YouTube by bashing George Lucas and the prequels, causing George Lucas to leave the franchise, leaving it over to the evil entity of Disney Lucasfilm 2018. And these events I'm about to mention predate YouTube, but people like this almost drove Ahmed Best, the actor of Jar Jar Binks, to suicide, and aided in the psychological breakdown of young Jake Lloyd. Criticism is fine. Malicious intent is something entirely different, when especially in retrospect there's virtually nothing to be malicious about. The same cannot be said about The Last Jedi, because both that movie and the corporation behind it have literally almost killed Star Wars. But these critics who had their credibility snapped in half because they so maliciously bashed the prequels and built a career on Star Wars praised the film that killed the franchise. And if nothing else, that film showed how pathetic and malicious those people really are. And make no mistake, I will get them all. You can hate these videos as much as you want, but I feel no amount of regret for making this one or any of the future ones I'm going to make on the subject. You can call me a gigantic hypocrite for being malicious in my intent, but honestly, I just couldn't care less. And don't you feel an ounce of pity for these people, because they deserve what they get. And that brings us to the end of episode 1. If you like this video, be sure to give it a big thumbs up, share it around if you like, and if you'd be interested in future installments of the series, be sure to subscribe to stay notified. I've linked my Twitter in the description if you'd like to contact me there. Also, if you'd like to support me on Patreon, you can also find the link in the description. These videos take a lot of time and effort to put together, so if you'd like to support me or get to know me on a more personal level, I thank you in advance for that. Even so much as $1 per month goes a long way in helping creators like myself. And for your viewing pleasure, I've left other response videos in the description for you. Till next time, I'm The Anomaly, thanks for watching, and I'll be back with more shortly.